accountant Dan Geltrude. Dan, it's so great to see you. So Dan, a lot to unpack here with what's going on in California. I'm still a California resident, so I find this very interesting. And yet all of his proposals I really don't think are going to offer enough relief for the people of California, considering all of the things that the Californians are facing.
When you look at a state like California having a surplus, which is hard to believe they got there, but great. So the attitude becomes, well, let's just spend more, as opposed to just being fiscally responsible and saying, look, we have additional funds. What should we do besides spend it all? To me, there are two options. One, how about returning it to the people that actually paid it in? Because remember, it's their money. That's like you go to the store, you buy something, you give more money than it costs. Aren't you supposed to get it back? But of course, that won't be the case here. Or number two, how about you actually save it for a rainy day, and then you use it when you have another pandemic situation or some type of crisis, as opposed to just spending it down and ultimately having nothing and being back to square one.
And then I mentioned this, the $125 million to make it easier for women to get abortions in California. I'm pro-life. It's no secret. But that just seems like a lot of money to me. And I feel like that could go to other areas that maybe like the majority of Californians would actually support.
Well, you know, that's one of those things where voting is your power. So if people don't like how the government is spending money, well, you know what? Then you go out and you vote for a change. Now, of course, abortion is a very hot topic. It divides people pretty meaningfully. So I'm not going to touch that per se. But when you start talking about spending taxpayer dollars on something, well, the taxpayers need to have a say in that. And I think that's a problem across the board, is that politicians are always looking to spend money on what will suit them, as opposed to ultimately what the people want.
Yeah, that's right. And when they supported Newsom, they didn't know that he was going to do this. So you're right. If people don't like it in California, they can vote differently. With that being said, also, too, there's this discussion of raising the minimum wage to $15.50 an hour. And yeah, I mean, times are tough. Things are getting really expensive. We're fighting against inflation. But this is just another blow for small businesses. Think about what they've already been through because of the pandemic, and now they're going to be pressured into another raise for their workers.
You know, the way things are right now, I could easily argue that there is no need to have a minimum wage. We have such a shortage of labor in the United States. Remember, it's only a 62% worker participation right now across the country, meaning workers that are eligible to be able to work, only 62% is working. So what does that do? That creates competition between employers. Why do you have to turn around and make it a minimum wage? Because the minimum wage never goes down. So at some point in time, we will come out of an inflationary period. When that happens, well, minimum wage will still be high, which means the consumer is stuck with higher labor costs forever. So ultimately, prices are never going to go down to exactly where we saw them, because minimum wage is always going to keep the costs relatively higher.
Yeah, and you make such a great point that they don't really need this right now, because it's been competitive for businesses to even get workers right now. They're probably paying pretty close to that in a lot of places in California. And then you mentioned the inflation. So we talked about this on the show originally. It wasn't happening. It was just in our minds. And then it was transitory. Then it was here, but it's like not as bad as we thought it was. Then it was as bad as we thought it was. And then they're like, oh, but it shouldn't be here that long. But it's going to seems a lot more like it's not going to be just temporary. It's going to be long term for a while.
It is going to be long term. And the reason for that, Steph, as you and I have talked about many times, is because when inflation starts, when you get that momentum of prices rising, they don't all of a sudden stop and retract. It takes a while to get to that point. So the reason that inflation is not slowing down and that it's actually continuing is based upon poor economic policies. And first and foremost in that area is our energy policies. You cannot fight against fossil fuels and keep saying, we're going to make it so difficult to supply gas and oil to consumers that it's going to cost so much they'll stop using it. You know what? We'll all be sitting here in the dark. So we need to get a little bit more intelligent and have some common sense related to energy. As cost of energy continues to rise, specifically fuel for cars, and how about diesel, we are not going to have a retraction of inflation anytime soon.
And then the messaging that we get from the administration is kind of all over the place. They say they want to tackle inflation, yet then in the same week, in the same day, they'll go and cancel an oil and gas lease. So it doesn't really make sense there. And then I see this. It says consumer confidence has sunk to 11-year low. We haven't seen it this low since 2013. I mean, what do you make of that report?
Well, it seems to make sense to me, but that consumers are going to have, be a little depressed because every time they go out shopping, every time they're paying a bill, anytime they fill up their tank, the numbers just keep getting higher and higher and higher. And I think the American consumer is smart enough to realize to say, what's going to change this? Where's the reversal? What's the plan? Well, there is no plan. So because there isn't a plan, you're going to have, the consumer really reflecting that and saying, maybe our darkest days are not behind us and they're actually still in front of us. And as I said, it's actually depressing.
Very depressing. Well, Dan, I appreciate you breaking this all down for us. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Steph.
Coming up next.